Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the Canes for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6. Mario's down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Paysor in the end zone for the touchdown. May throws it late through the left hand. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Nard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. Coming on the air here tonight on a Thursday night, and it's time to talk about the Central Florida game as Carolina gets ready to take on the team that Bill Belichick called Central, and apparently got them very offended. They were very hurt by his words for them coming into this game, and so maybe a little bit of extra motivation for them coming into what will be the first ever matchup between the two sides. So, of course, we're going to do like we always do. We'll tell you everything that you need to know about Central Florida. We'll go through the Tar Heel storylines for this game. We'll talk about the keys to the game for Carolina if they want to get a victory. And then, of course, at the end of the show, we will do our predictions for this game. But as I mentioned, first time that Carolina is going to be meeting Central Florida. They were, of course, scheduled to meet 2 previous times. 2018 canceled by Hurricane Florence. 2020 explainable, canceled by COVID. And so those 2 matchups never happened, and Carolina waited until this year to be able to get that rescheduled. They will have to go down to the Bright House, which is one of the tougher environments, was for a long time in the group of 5, and now is a Power 4 conference environment that will test Carolina. There's no doubt about that. Carolina, of course, looking for their first Power 4 win under Bill Belichick, and they're trying to keep the momentum going after a bye week. So, first of all, Scott Frost back at Central Florida after spending 7 years away from the program, led them to one of their most successful stretches, including a 13-0 season in his final year there the first time around. So he has some good history there. The Knights are certainly a team that takes a lot of pride in what they do and how successful they've been and, getting themselves into the Big 12 at this point. So this is going to be, I think, a tougher matchup than maybe we thought even coming into the season for Carolina, especially since we don't believe that Carolina is nearly as good as we thought they would be coming into the year, but still an opportunity for Carolina to pick up a big win. When you look at this matchup, the environment that Carolina is going to have to go into, Scott Frost coming back there as a head coach, what type of test do you think this poses for Carolina just on the surface?
Yeah, look, it's going to be their first game on the road against Power 4 competition. We saw what happened at home in their first matchup of the year from a school from the same conference, but I think it's important to stress to folks, I don't think, even if Carolina loses on Saturday afternoon, Central Florida is not at the same level that TCU is. Central Florida, I don't think, is ready to compete for a Big 12 that is as wide open as it's maybe ever been through the first month of the year. we told you all preseason long, TCU was good enough to compete to win that conference. And with some of the ways, that Kansas State's looked among some other schools, I think TCU will be playing meaningful football in November to maybe get their way to a Big 12 championship game. Central Florida, they're not there yet. And so I kind of find it maybe not disrespectful. I do find it odd that Carolina is, I think, now a full touchdown underdog in this game. I know the line opened up at 6.5. We talked about it this morning. I think it has moved to 7. You're talking about a Central Florida team that is not to the same level as Carolina, but brand new coaching staff. They've brought in, 50 new players, and you go back to their first win of the season. And I know Jacksonville State's really come a long way as they've made the transition now to the FBS level, but they won that game by a touchdown. And that game was tied deep into the second half. I believe it was tied 10-10 in the fourth quarter. They then played, a walkover opponent. They beat them by 61. And then, they were off last week. And so for as much as we don't know what to expect from Carolina, and rightfully so, there's not a whole lot that we know about Central Florida right now. We know what Central Florida can be and what they might get back to under Scott Frost, but that's not where this program is at. And so, if Carolina has truly made the progress that they've made the last couple of weeks, and I believe they have, I think it's fair to expect them to, one, be more competitive this time around against a Big 12 opponent, and B, maybe come away with their most important victory so far of the season. And if Carolina can get a win on the road, going into the first of 2 bye weeks that they'll have kind of in a 3-week span, I think you got to feel really good about what this team can be, because I still think the growth and the development this team will take will happen with those 2 bye weeks. You feel a lot more confident about that growth and development taking a step forward if they enter the bye week with momentum coming off 3 straight victories.
Yeah, I think that is certainly what you're hoping for if you're Carolina, because this feels like a big game too, man. You look at some of the other games that Carolina is going to have in conference play, things that, games that we thought, I think, maybe not that were going to be easy, but certainly were ones that we were marking down as potential wins for Carolina, like Cal, like Virginia. Those are games that all of a sudden now don't look nearly as winnable, especially the Cal game. I cannot stress enough to people how much Cal looks like I don't know about contender in the ACC, but looks like a team that could win 8 games, could be really tough for Carolina, even though they have that bye week going into it. So I think it's going to be a crucial matchup for the Tar Heels to get in this one. In Central Florida, as you mentioned, they're a 2-0 football team. They, struggled against Jacksonville State a little bit, won 17-10. Now, Jacksonville State, when they were under the direction of Rich Rodriguez, certainly a very formidable opponent. I don't know how formidable they're going to be going into this year without Rich Rod there. Of course, Rich Rod has gone back to coach at West Virginia. So what does that team ultimately look like? There's probably been a lot of turnover there too. So maybe that isn't necessarily the greatest win for Central Florida. But then they go and pick up a huge win over North Carolina A&T, where they just destroyed them, scored 68 points in that game. I get it. North Carolina A&T is far from the Rod Broadway days where they were a successful FCS program. But at the same time, to score 68 points in a game is certainly impressive. They ran the football incredibly well, and that's one thing they've done out of the gate so far this year that makes them pretty dangerous. So Carolina's got to be careful coming into this game, just thinking this is going to be a walkover opponent. But again, they're dealing with a lot of the same things that Carolina's dealing with, a lot of turnover, and for them, they're still trying to find their footing as they've only played 2 games, as you mentioned. They had that bye week, so they had 2 weeks to prepare for Carolina. That's going to be interesting to see what exactly they've come up with, because it's tough for us to figure out what exactly this Carolina team is at this point. I can only imagine being on the other side, having to figure out what the Tar Heels are coming into this game, trying to game plan against them. But let's take a look at Central Florida. We'll start with the offense. They're averaging 42.5 points a game, 491 yards of total offense per game, 259 of that coming through the air, 232 of that coming on the ground. Taven Jackson has settled into the starting role at quarterback, and he's had 2 solid performances. It's not anything that I think is going to get him in Heisman talks or anything like that, but I think he's certainly a guy that's been very serviceable for them. Of course, the transfer from Indiana previously before that was at Tennessee. So a guy that's been in Power 4 programs before, was recruited highly coming out of high school. So certainly a guy that has some talent there. Ja'Cory Brown, a guy who could check in at certain times. He's been the more mobile quarterback, 5 carries this year, 106 yards and a touchdown. So certainly a dangerous guy with his legs if they do throw him in there. At the running back spot, Miles Montgomery's the guy that handles the bulk of the carries there. So far this year, ran for 114 yards and a touchdown. But watch out for Jaden Nixon, who is an explosive threat. He has carried the ball just 6 times, turned that into 150 yards and a touchdown. So he has certainly been a big play threat for them in the run game. That's something that Carolina has to be aware of. You look at the passing targets for Taven Jackson. Really, they've been spreading the ball all around to a bunch of different guys, but Dwayne Thomas Jr., DJ Black, those are the 2 leading receivers so far this year and seem to be the guys that are the most dangerous, especially Dwayne Thomas Jr. That's one that Carolina is going to have to take care of in this game. Also have to keep an eye on their tight end, Dylan Wade, who's got 4 catches for 54 yards, but another guy that came from the Power 4 level has transferred down and now is hoping to find, or not transferred down, but transferred to another Power 4 school and now is hoping to have a little bit more success. The offensive line is off to a solid start, especially in the run game. They've been pretty good. Of course, when you've paved the way for a run game that is ran for 232 yards per game in the first couple of games, that certainly is something that would show that they have had a lot of success. Meanwhile, in terms of pass protection, they've allowed 12 quarterback pressures so far this year and 2 sacks. Pretty solid numbers through the first 2 games. Guys to know on that offensive line: Carter Miller, the center, who anchors the group and then tackles Paul Rubelt, as well as Preston Cushman. Those are the 2 guys that Carolina's edge rushers will have to deal with on the outside. The guards, seen as the weakness of this unit, so this is where the interior of Carolina's defensive line should be able to eat. You look at this offense for Central Florida. What does it make you think about them going into this game? Because it's really 2 completely different performances. A lot of their production coming against North Carolina A&T, but when you have a performance like that, it's hard not to think that that's something that could generate some momentum.
Yeah, I think, it's definitely been a tale of 2 performances. I think they've got to kind of figure out, are they more of the offense that we saw against Jacksonville State? Or is it more of the offense that you saw take advantage of a FCS opponent? Kind of the same thing we're wondering about Carolina. Is it the offense that we saw struggle against TCU and Charlotte, or is Carolina's offense going to morph into kind of what we saw last week against Richmond? The thing you got to know, and I think, this will be another, test for Belichick and just the adaptiveness, if that's even a word, to the college game. Like when Scott Frost and that offense is rolling, the tempo is a big part of it. And so, they want to play fast. They look for big explosive plays. That was the hallmark when he was at Central Florida the first time. And that's what he's going to look to recreate here his second time. And I think it's important to remember, with 50 new players and the roster top to bottom isn't where it was in his first tenure there, but they do have athletes. They do have guys that are capable of making game-changing plays. And so Carolina's got to be prepared for that. And so I think, a big thing to watch, something that, maybe if the TCU game would have been closer, we could have really maybe honed in on, is how does Carolina handle the tempo, with their substitutions and everything like that. And then can they limit the explosive plays from a team that's going to want to run the ball to set up play action pass, and really try to get behind your defense. And so, it was 2 uneven performances from that Central Florida offense. But if they're closer to the unit that we saw the second time out there, this will be an offense that will look to really, impose its will against the Carolina defense that has taken a step forward the past 2 weeks, albeit against lesser competition.
Yeah, that's the thing for Carolina's defense is that, they've taken steps forward, but it's against two of the weakest teams that they're going to play on their schedule, if not the two weakest teams. I think the only other one that you would put in that same category is Stanford. Stanford, of course, coming off a victory at home where they dominated Boston College. So who knows what that game is going to actually turn out to be. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about some of the storylines for the Tar Heels, including, talking about limiting those explosive plays and everything like that. Let's turn our attention to the Central Florida defense. So far this year, allowed 8.5 points per game, 261 yards of total offense, just 98.5 passing yards per game, 162 rushing yards per game. The defensive line has led the charge for the unit, which has 20 tackles for loss and 5 sacks in the first 2 games that they played this year. Edge Nigel Lee Kelly, as well as defensive tackle Rodney Laura, a name that Tar Heel fans should remember well. He was with the team in the spring, are the guys that are standing out early. Both guys with 4 tackles for loss, both guys with at least a sack and a half so far this season. So those are certainly 2 names to keep an eye on. Know that they are guys that will be able to cause some havoc plays in the backfield if Carolina is not careful. At the linebacker spot, Cole Kozlowski is the leading, or is the guy that leads the unit, leads the team in tackles so far this year. But, this is still a group that has been part of the reason why they have allowed some rushing yards so far this year. This, along with the interior of that defensive line, that's a big part of the reason why, if you're Carolina, got to get your run game rolling in this game against the Knights. The secondary, yet to be threatened really so far this year by a really good passing offense. But still, you got to give them a lot of credit. When you're holding teams to under 100 yards passing, that shows that you're doing something right. Jaden Bellamy, Braden Marshall, very solid cornerback duo back there. And Antoine Jackson is another name to know at the safety spot. He's a guy that comes down in the box, helps a lot, very athletic player. So certainly someone that Carolina has to be aware of. You look at this defense, and to me, I think the thing that really sticks out is the amount of havoc plays that they've already caused this year. 20 tackles for loss and 5 sacks in the first 2 games. Very impressive from this group. Albeit not against the greatest competition, but I still think they deserve a lot of credit. And this is what has me a little bit worried about them matching up against Carolina's offense, which still isn't in the best rhythm, yet so far this season.
Yeah, what's crazy to think about is from a talent perspective, Carolina is going to be the most gifted offense that Central Florida has seen so far this year. And you look at Carolina's numbers, and they're rather unimpressive. We talked about that on Monday when we recapped the win over Richmond. It's arguably, the worst Power 4 offense right now in all of college football. And so I think Central Florida, this is a group that their first 2 weeks very successful. They've lived in the opponent's backfield. They've made a lot of tackles behind the line of scrimmage. They've gotten pressure on the quarterback and brought him down. They're really looking at this as a way to kind of validate those first 2 performances because they haven't done so against Power 4 competition. And so I think Carolina's got to be mindful of that. They've got to make sure that, this offensive line that, did look better a week ago, this is going to have to be the best performance so far this season, because if you don't communicate up front, if you don't do what you need to do, then they've proven that they're good enough to wreak havoc up front at the line of scrimmage and just disrupt offenses and take them out of what they want to do. And the last thing I think Gio Lopez needs to find himself in is a bunch of 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8s, where that defensive line can pin its ears back and come and get after the quarterback. I think you'll look at the fact they've given up 162 rush yards per game. That's going to be what Belichick and Freddie Kitchens are going to want to attack. They're going to want to soften them up with the run game. And it does feel like if there's one thing Carolina is confident in is they know that, Damon June is RB1 and that Davian Goss is going to be his backup. And so I think you'd expect a lot of early run calls for Carolina in this game just to kind of settle their quarterback down and kind of find their footing on the road and what's going to be the most hostile environment they've played in so far away this season from Kenan Stadium. So you definitely got to look at what Central Florida has done and kind of take it with a grain of salt because of the competition. This will be a group that'll be motivated to kind of come out and show up and show out against Bill Belichick's group, especially after he disrespected them by calling them Central in his press conference earlier this week.
Yeah, just the stupidest thing to get offended by. But this is a
program, by the way, that claims a fake national championship.
Yeah, it's a victim program. Like let's just be honest. I mean, that's really what they are. They basically want to be the victim of, we've been screwed by the NCAA because we didn't get a chance to play for a national championship. Now we're playing victim because they called us Central. And again, he was just referring to Central. I don't know if that was how he had first referred to them as that. I did not listen to his press conference after the game against Richmond. I listened to the one on Tuesday that he did, his normal weekly press conference. And he called him Central Florida. He talked about Scott Frost being a guy that he has plenty of respect for because he was a guy that he coached. He was with the Jets way back when Bill Belichick was on their defensive staff. So, I mean, yeah, he's got plenty of respect for them. I don't see how that's really going to be used as billboard material. But, hey, if you need that much billboard material for this game, well, that tells you you're not really that motivated of a team, especially because this is one of the games for them. And we've talked about, you mentioned how open the Big 12 is this year. I mean, how many games on their schedule are really that winnable? I mean, if they're looking to make a bowl game, they probably feel like this is a game that they have to win, very similar to how Carolina probably feels. So, I mean, look, I don't think they should be worried about this kind of stuff, but hey, maybe they are, and maybe that will, spark that unit on the defensive side of the ball. Special teams wise, kind of a weird unit. They do bring in No Rualis, who is the guy that handles the place kicking duties for them, but he's already missed an extra point and missed a field goal so far this year. The thing is, they were pretty solid last year at James Madison, 16 of 20 on field goals. He did miss 2 extra points there again last year. So he's missed 2 kicks early on in the season, but that might just be part of it for him. Anthony Vanieri is the guy that handles the kicking or the punting for them. He is averaging just 37.8 yards per punt so far this year. But much like the guy that they faced a week ago for Richmond, he's allowed just 2 returns so far this year, which have gained 0 yards. So definitely a guy that's not punting the ball too far, not a guy that's going to be able to flip field position for Central Florida, which helps Carolina, but not a guy that's going to give up a lot of returns. Their return game, the most dangerous that Carolina's faced so far this year. Jaden Nixon, who we talked about, explosive guy in the backfield for them when he carries the football well. Also an explosive kick returner who's already taken 1 to the house so far this season. And Antoine Jackson, the safety, is the guy who handles the punt returning for them. He's returned just 3 punts so far this year, which 3, I guess, in the first 2 games is actually a pretty decent amount. But he is averaging 19.7 yards per punt return. So that's not an area that I wrote down as a key to the game for Carolina, but certainly they have to be aware of these returners. They have to be able to keep the ball out of their hands as much as possible. Don't let them be the threat that they could possibly be if you give them opportunities. So that's something that, we don't talk about a lot, but I think it's going to be important for Carolina in this game. Now let's get to the Tar Heel storylines. And you mentioned one of them when we were talking about the defense. That is Gio Lopez. And this is the prove-it game for Gio Lopez. It really feels like it, because if he comes out and struggles again, and this offense continues to be as inefficient as it is, he continues to be a guy that has a QBR that's in the 20s. I find it hard to believe that Carolina is not going to at least have to have the conversation going into the bye week of, should we take a look at Max Johnson moving forward? Is he what would be best for this offense? Really, the thing that Bill Belichick talked about this week that I thought was the most interesting thing was the timing. Someone asked him about that and how it relates to Gio Lopez, what's going on, and why is the timing just not there? And, Belichick didn't seem overly concerned about it, but I do think that from a fan base standpoint, we are definitely concerned that it just doesn't seem like he's on the right page with a lot of his guys. We've talked about the fact that he doesn't throw with anticipation. He's not a guy that's throwing guys open. Carolina's wide receivers, from what I've noticed, creating a decent amount of separation, enough to be able to get the football. But Gio Lopez, one of the things that we've said with him, and we've been focused on it really outside of the opener. I mean, the last two games, part of the issue has been that he hasn't really been all that accurate either. This is, all in all, this is a huge game for him. He needs to come out and prove that he is the starting quarterback for this team and that this offense can move efficiently. Because I'm going to tell you right now, we're 3 games into the season. I don't see this offense adjusting to him. I think this is an offense that they are going to stick by what they plan to do coming into the season. And this is something where Gio Lopez is going to have to evolve himself. And right now, I just don't know if that is necessarily going to happen for the South Alabama transfer.
Yeah, it feels like if Carolina struggles again offensively, I don't know how Belichick and the staff can continue to send the message that this is the guy and they're not going to take the look at Max Johnson. Just because, the quarterback play has been just so subpar. I mean, part of this is, we got so spoiled by, Trubisky, then you got Sam, and then you got Drake. But this is worse than it was with Nathan Elliott at quarterback. This is worse than it was when Chaz Surratt was trying to play quarterback, let alone what you saw last year with Jacoby Criswell and Connor Harrell at quarterback as well. And so I do think there's pressure on Gio this week to perform and to deliver. I don't know what the stat line has to look like to invoke confidence. I don't know if he has to throw for a certain number of yards, touchdowns, completion percentage, or whatnot. If Carolina wins the game, it's going to make it harder to really have the conversation about them looking at Max Johnson when you go into the bye week, going into the Clemson game. But it has to look better. It has to look cleaner, man. I think that's just the biggest thing is it just hasn't looked clean. It hasn't felt clean. I talked about it when I did the Belichick presser recap yesterday. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it or watch it on the YouTube channel. Like, when you're talking about throwing in anticipation, that's something that when you're in the stands as a fan, like if you know football, I could tell you when I thought the ball should have been out because I could feel where he should have been in his progression, where the route was at and where the ball should be. And it's not there. And so if my, basic level football IQ ass can kind of feel that way, then I can only imagine, how these players feel, because I thought this past weekend, I thought that was the best game plan Freddie Kitchens had put together. I thought he put the wide receivers in better positions to make plays, but your quarterback has to get them the football. And you're right. I think this is not going to become a up and down the field spread option RPO offense. It's not going to become that. They are committed to playing this way, which really makes you wonder why they brought in a quarterback to begin with that doesn't fit that style of play. But this is what they're committed to doing. And so this is what they're going to do. Then Gio Lopez has to look the part because if not, it's going to be hard to keep Max Johnson on the sidelines with just how comfortable and confident he looked in the last quarter or so against TCU way back where in the opener.
Yeah, I mean, he looked like a guy that knew the style of offense that this group wanted to play, was able to move them up and down the field. And we've said it. Maybe there are some people that believe that they had dialed it back and that Max Johnson was really getting the scrubs for TCU and that those guys weren't really playing hard. To me, they still left some important guys in that game.
Yeah, that wasn't the case because TCU was still throwing the football when the game was 41-7.
Yeah, he was
like
trying
Sonny
to run
Dykes. Yeah, Sonny Dykes made it personal, which credit to him. His team wasn't talked about at all going into the game. It was all about Belichick, and he didn't want to have happen against Dion 3 years ago happen again. But we were there. If they were just playing soft zone defense and they weren't trying to still embarrass Carolina, we would have told you guys that they dropped back into prevent and they blitzed him on 3rd and 7, and he stood in the pocket and made a throw.
Yeah, should have been probably could have been targeting, and they didn't call it. But
yeah, so it wasn't like TCU called off the dogs. No, he was still playing against a defense that was playing as if the game was still nothing. and he marched Carolina right down the field and scored a touchdown. So,
Yep.
they can take that. If you think that, go back and rewatch the game, folks. That's not what happened. TCU was there to embarrass Carolina, and Max Johnson made the score look better than what it probably should have been.
Yeah, and I think he probably showed you at that point that he knows what he's doing in this kind of offense, in case you had any questions about that. I did not. I knew that he was a guy that, coming from the systems that he played in at LSU and at Texas A&M, he was going to be able to handle those types of systems with ease. And so I think he's going to be perfectly fine if he has to go in there. That's the guy that I want. I mean, I know a lot of people are saying, well, what about Bryce Baker? Maybe they should give him a look. From my understanding, Bryce Baker has had some issues converting himself over from what he played, the system that he played at in high school, to the system that Carolina is playing in now. Now, again, you could say, well, why would you have guys in the system that don't really fit the system? It's a great question. I mean, we broached that topic as well. I said it. I thought that they panicked when they went through spring practice and found out that they didn't necessarily have a guy. I don't know if they really liked what they saw from Ryan Brown, and Ryan Brown said, I don't care. I'm going back to Purdue. And they said, hey, we got to bring somebody else in here because we just don't know if Max Johnson is going to be ready to go. I don't blame him for that, but it just felt like such an odd fit, and it still feels like that now. And so I need to see it just look – I need to see an offense that looks more confident, that looks like they're able to lean on their quarterback a little bit more and utilize him to drive the ball down the field, whether that means with his legs, whether that means through the air. You need to be able to have a quarterback that can move the chains for you. And right now, I don't have the confidence that on third down and medium, third down and long, that Gio's moving the chains for you. And neither does this coaching staff. They've proven that to you when they run the football on third and long, when they decide, hey, we're going to settle for a punt here. That's the thing that I think you want to see in this game, is that, hey, he's doing enough things to where the coaching staff is starting to trust him, and he's making those throws that he needs to make. Just that's all you've got to do. And that sounds so simple. Well, how do you describe that? The throws that are there, they need to be accurate. They need to be where they need to be. They need to be on guys, get the lead receivers on certain big plays. I think that is what you need to see in this game in order for you to say, this is our guy.
Yeah, I need to see the offense look modern. I need to see the offense look competent. I need to see the offense.
Competent is a great word. Yep.
I need to see the offense look like what the offense should look like with the talent level that's on the offensive side of the football. Because I reject the notion that Carolina doesn't have dudes to be explosive on offense. No, you don't have the De'Ami Browns, the Daz Newsomes, the Josh Downs. No, those guys aren't on this roster. Jordan Shipp's a hell of a football player, man. And you got to see some of what he's capable of doing last week against Richmond, but he hasn't been featured enough. Kobe Paysour, I think, is a lot better than what you've seen through the first three games of the season. I still think Davian Goss is the best running back on the roster. But Damon June has overtaken him. But I want to see those two guys put in positions where their talent and their skill is being utilized the correct way. And I think this was always my biggest question, comment, concern about Belichick when he came to the college game, was how adaptive would he be to the way that the game is played at the college level? Because it looks like, he's so committed to playing offense the way that the offense is played at the NFL level. Well, if you watch college football like we do on Saturday, and then you watch the NFL on Sunday like we do, you've seen it kind of reverse where, 50% of the college playbook has infiltrated to the NFL. Like, the NFL offenses are becoming more college-based. A lot more of the same schemes and concepts. And so, and to me, this feels like a kind of a Belichick mandate. Well, this is the way that we're going to play because this is the way that I won at the NFL level. But this isn't the NFL, man. You don't have the NFL players. You don't have the processing that you had at the NFL level, at the college level. And you're not putting your guys, in my opinion, in the best position to succeed. And maybe, if they have another rough performance on Saturday, they scrap it. They have 2 weeks to prepare for Clemson, and we start to see a much more modern-looking offense when they host the Tigers in a few weeks. But point blank period, they cannot continue to win games with the way they've looked offensively through the first 3 weeks of the season.
Yep.
They're not good enough defensively to win with the way the offense has looked. And to be frank, I don't know how many teams in the country could win 6, 7, 8 games with as bad as Carolina has been offensively the first 3 weeks of the year.
Well, they're Michigan. They're Michigan from last year. They're a team that wants to be able to run the football at a very high rate, but their offense is going to become very predictable as the season goes along because they don't have a quarterback. They don't have someone that can throw the ball consistently and move the team down the field. Where I think, going back to last year's Michigan team, I thought that they had some playmakers on the outside. They have been acquiring those types of guys through recruiting and through the transfer portal. They have made those additions. It was just they didn't have the right quarterback. I think Carolina's going through similar stuff because, as you said, I really like Jordan Shipp. I think Jordan Shipp creates a decent amount of separation. He's shown you that through the first 3 weeks of the season. I think that Chris Culliver is a guy that probably doesn't get talked about enough for what he's able to do as a deep threat down the field. I think that certainly is something that's there. I mean, we've seen it. There's been a lot of games, a lot of times through these first 3 games that people have pointed out, hey, he's got open receivers down the field. He's just not seeing them. That's something that's got to change. And we knew this was going to take time. We knew that the game could be moving a little fast for Gio, but man, we're 3 games in. We're on the 4th game of the season, and again, we're looking around at the rest of our schedule and we're saying, how many guaranteed wins are there? We need you to sort of snap into form here, and so this is a big game for him. The good news is he's got a good running game that he can lean on. I think Damon June, he's really found himself here. I think Davian Goss is more than serviceable as well. I think that Carolina can lean on those guys in this game, but ultimately it's going to come down to the quarterback play. If Central Florida is able to continue to shut you down the way that other teams have been able to and the way that they've done so far this year, then I don't know if Carolina can win this game. But if Gio Lopez finds a little bit of a rhythm and gets back to doing some of the things that we saw from him in the Charlotte game, which I think was his best game so far, then I think you've got a chance to win this game. It's just, what it tells me is that Vegas does not believe in the quarterback. They do not believe in what Carolina's been doing defensively over the last couple of weeks, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But I think one thing that we got to talk about as well as, really quickly, Joey from Huntersville, who is a listener to us on WFNZ in Charlotte on our day jobs. He sends in, why can't they structure the rest of the game like they do the first drive? I mean, look, that's a great point. We have said this, that Freddie Kitchens seems to be a guy that is amazing when it comes to the game script that he sets up. When you script out the first 15 or so plays of the game, those plays seem to go really well, and then from there, things seem to fall off. I think it is a fair question to ask why he has not been able to make those adjustments when teams have been able to adjust to him. You're a guy that comes from the NFL level. You've been a play caller for a long time. Why are you not making certain adjustments? It feels like to me, he is a guy that is so stuck in his ways. And you think that it's Belichick. I think that there might be some elements of that. I think Belichick does want to run a specific style. But I think also there is part of that is Freddie Kitchens' style of offense, which is try to run the football at a high rate, use the play action game to get your quarterback going. And from there, that everything should really take off. I think the problem with me isn't even necessarily the scheme. It's, again, I just don't see an efficient group out there right now. And that's what you need if you're going to run this style of offense. if you're going to be really slow and plotting and you're not going to have that many plays, you want to really shorten the game, well, then you got to be uber efficient, and that's not what you're seeing right now from Carolina.
No, it's definitely not. And I guess the reason why I think it's more Belichick than Freddie Kitchens is when you looked at what got him the job in Cleveland when he took over as the interim, that offense was explosive. It was dynamic. And so maybe I just think that's who he is as the play caller, and maybe not the guy that was what the OC went for the Giants, and some of the
Interim
other
OC,
places.
but
It just feels like to me that Carolina just doesn't want to run 85 plus plays and put up 40 points and
Yep.
do and maybe and look, if it works, then and it's probably something that Belichick, when he got here and evaluated what went wrong, that was the clear thing he wanted to change. I just think they've kind of overcorrected too much, if that's even such a thing. This is a different game than the NFL. You just looked at what happened with Georgia and Tennessee. Two defenses that last year that were top 10, 15 in the country. They played a game 41-38. Like you look at Bama and a lot of games are, in the 30s, the upper 20s. I don't know if you can win week in, week out, 17-14, 21-17. Maybe you can. I just think the game has changed too much to even try to want to win that way. And so we'll just have to wait. We'll have to wait and see. And maybe as the course of time, we'll see is if it's more of a Belichick mandate or a Freddie Kitchens mandate. But nonetheless, I think they would tell you they know they got to get better offensively if they want to become the type of team they want to become in 2025.
Well, because Joey says right here, Jimmy's and Joe's lack of talent type stuff.
No, it's not.
I don't see it. I don't see it either. I think it's one Jimmy, possibly a Joe. I think there are some guys maybe on this offense that you do question, but to me, it's mainly you question your quarterback, and maybe the offensive line. And the offensive line, it's part of it is because you're playing your 6th, 7th, and 8th guy along the offensive line because you've lost Christo Kelly. We have no idea when he's going to be back to full strength, when he's actually going to be out there playing. We haven't seen him in 2 weeks.
Wasn't even asked about it on Monday or Tuesday. So
so we have no idea. So we don't know about him. Blasky is expected to be out until at least the Clemson game. It could extend beyond that. And then apparently William Boone got banged up in the game against Richmond. So if he's out, then it's Travion Green, who, is serviceable enough, not a great pass protector. We've talked about that, but a really good run blocker. And it's Aiden Buchanan, a young true freshman who was a, fall enrollee and is getting there, but it's understandable where there could be some struggles. That would be the only Jimmys and Joes that I would look at and say, maybe those are some areas where Carolina doesn't necessarily have the talent. Offensively, I feel like they've got the talent.
Yes.
And I think the one thing that you're looking for in this game, moving on from the quarterback and everything like that, is the trench play. That's going to be very important in this game. Are they able to build off of what they did these last 2 weeks? Because these last 2 weeks, you faced two teams that are probably going to be the least physical that you faced and the least talented that you faced in the trenches. So now, are you going to be able to carry that over against a team in Central Florida whose offensive line is run blocking very well and whose defensive line is causing havoc plays in the backfield? They're averaging 10 tackles for loss per game in the first 2 games of the season. How does your group hold up in that area? I think that's going to be a very important part of this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. When you look at the offensive line, they proved against TCU they could, for one drive, impose their will and move a defensive line at that level up and down the field. But they could not sustain it. That's going to be the question in this game, is can they, over the course of 60 minutes, impose their will, create the running lanes for Damon June, Davian Goss, for those guys to be effective in the run game? Can they hold up in pass protection to give Gio Lopez a chance to make plays with his arm and maybe with his legs. I'm really interested to see what this revamped, new look defensive line looks like on Saturday. Because, when you look at the first two games or the last two games of the first two wins of Belichick, that was the evidence where they got better, where they definitely took a step forward. You look at what they did in the run defense against Charlotte, and then, how good they were limiting the run. When you look at just, yards per attempt this past week against Richmond, their gap integrity was better. They did a much better job getting off blocks, rallying to the football, and the defensive line filled the holes to allow your linebackers to flow downhill and make play after play after play. How legitimate is that going to be now where every game moving forward is against power conference competition? If it's more legitimate than not, Carolina's going to be really good defensively because that linebacking trio is no joke. Like, they've got three legitimate linebackers that are going to make plays week in, week out. And that's it's a real good thing to feel confident in that now you went from usually Carolina's had a linebacker, maybe two. Now you got three, but you need the big uglies to do their job up front to give those guys a chance to make the plays that they're capable of making that could really turn the game one way or another. So, look, it's always about trench play, especially when you're trying to go on the road and get a win. And I think we'll learn just how far Carolina has come on both sides of the football, because I find it hard to believe that they go on the road and win this game without being able to rush for, I'd say, 150-plus yards offensively, and then defensively making the plays we've seen the last couple of weeks against Charlotte and Richmond.
Yeah, I mean, the run defense is really the big focus for me. It's the other storyline. One of the other storylines that I have written down here is, did they shake off the TCU performance? Because the last 2 weeks, you've been really, really good in the run game. Your run fits have been much better. Guys have been where they're supposed to be. You've talked about you talked about gap integrity. I think that's certainly something that maybe these guys had to learn in that first week of the season. But we're seeing guys make impacts. Now, would I like some of these guys to have a little bit more, push at the line of scrimmage and be able to turn these into tackles for loss? Yes. But the good news is if they're allowing these plays to be positive yards, it's about 1 or 2 yards. They have limited everything. I mean, you talk about last week going into the fourth quarter, 33 carries against them, 51 yards. Against Charlotte, 29 carries in the game, 21 yards total. Carolina's done everything that they've needed to do in the run defense in the last 2 games. Now, how do you turn that into something that you can take into this game against a rushing offense that really, I mean, what it's been is it's not a group that's wearing teams down. It's just been a big play group. You've had couple of guys that have ripped off some really big runs, and that's really been the difference for this team and their run offense so far this year. Thing that's scary is you go back to that game against TCU. Was TCU really wearing you down? To a certain extent, yes, but what really killed you? The big plays in the run game. That's what Carolina's got to be able to find a way to prevent in this game. And so I think that TCU game is going to be one that I think they've learned a lot from. I don't know if they'll go back and watch tape from that game ahead of this game and say, hey, remember this. These are the areas that we've got to make sure we're buttoned up in. But I do think you got to give a lot of credit to guys like Leroy Jackson, who has been playing really well up front, really seen the improvement from week 1 to week 3 for him. Isaiah Johnson, been pretty consistent all 3 weeks. Has been on and off the field in terms of how much he's playing, but still certainly a guy that I think if you look at his numbers, you look at how he's graded out, he's off to a pretty good start to the season. And then there's a guy that nobody's really talking about, and I wanted to make sure that we shouted him out because Pro Football Focus shouted him out here for Carolina earlier today, and that would be Xavier Lewis, who is a former, basically at this point, earlier this offseason, he was basically a walk-on because, yeah, he's a true freshman. You could say that he is a guy that's on scholarship, so how could he be a walk-on? This was not a guy that was a part of the recruiting class for Carolina. Like, this was not someone that they, ended up signing to their class. He wasn't included in that group that signed back in February. He was a guy that came, in as a local kid that was from Rollsville High School, wanted to continue playing football, tried out for the football team, and now here he is. And he's graded out incredibly well. So he's holding his own. Now you could say, well, how many snaps is he really playing? He's playing a decent amount of snaps for Carolina, even as an undersized defensive tackle, and he's holding his own. So maybe he's a guy that could be a key in this game for Carolina on the run defense side of things. The other thing, the last storyline that I had is, again, looking back to that opener. Has this secondary found its footing? Because in the first game of the year, they had not. And it was mainly Marcus Allen, but there were, the secondary as a whole really got tore up that entire night. You have to imagine that, the last two opponents probably watched the film from TCU and were trying to take advantage of stuff like that too. I think Central Florida is more apt to be able to take advantage of that because of the athletes that they have than the two previous teams that you played the last couple of weeks. I really look at this as, a key game for Carolina's secondary to prove that the opener is behind them and that they are playing good complementary football with this run defense. I think both of them, the run defense and this passing defense, when it comes to this secondary, both of them are going to be tested to prove where they're at in this game against Central Florida.
Yeah, you look back at the run defensive effort against TCU. Was it great? Obviously not. You take away the two big runs that really blew the game open. I thought Carolina had kind of held its own, and then the dam just broke when really all hell just broke loose inside Kenan Stadium. We're going to find out about the secondary because Scott Frost has better athletes than the last two opponents have to where he knows he can legitimately challenge that. Charlotte knew, look, they know, first off, they're compromised at quarterback. We know that firsthand because we saw Connor Harrell, a year ago. They were just
our guy got hurt tonight, so I do want to say that I'm praying for him, hoping that he's all right because it looked like he something with his knee. So
yeah, so you knew they were going to try to want to run the ball and just really kind of keep that score competitive on the scoreboard, which they did. You knew Richmond was just, that was as plotting an offensive attack as we've seen. They were literally snapping the ball every time with 2 seconds. They knew they couldn't go in there and try to throw the ball around against Carolina. Central Florida will at least try to, and they're not going to throw at Thaddeus Dixon. It's 3 games. My man is he's locking dudes up. He's got the seatbelt on whatever wide receiver he's being asked to cover. So they're going to put, Marcus Allen in a bunch of plays. And can he make plays? Can he not make plays? I think it's going to really be the telltale sign of where the secondary is at. I think kind of like what you've seen, I think Will Hardy's gotten a lot more consistent. He was bad against TCU, and it hurt me to say that because he's kind of been the man crush for me this offseason. I think Gavin Gibson's brought something to the back end of the defense as well. It's really that other corner spot opposite Thad that we got to really find out. Has Carolina, gotten a lot better at than where they were 3 weeks ago? If they are, I think that bodes really, really well. If they have more confidence in Marcus Allen, then I think you can really start to see Stephen Belichick get exotic with some of the blitzes and maybe send in a corner blitz or something like that if he understands that Marcus Allen is going to get burnt like toast on Sunday every time he's out there in a one-on-one situation. So we're going to find out because, Scott Frost is going to put those guys in a bunch of conflict, and that's probably the area that we'll learn the most about from Carolina's point of view defensively is, just where the secondary is at after Josh Hoover carved them up in a big way back in the opener on Labor Day night.
Yeah, also keep an eye on that nickel corner spot too, because Caleb Koss struggled in the second game of the year against Charlotte. Remember, Javen Nichols went off in that game. So certainly a guy that I think needs to prove himself as well for Carolina in there, or Now, apparently, there was an injury to him earlier in the season. One of the guys that you've liked early on this year, Trey Miller, that could be a guy that could be playing just a little bit more for Carolina if Caleb Cost continues to struggle. All right.
Man, it's physical as hell, man.
Yeah, that's what you said. So we'll see. Hopefully that continues for him in the snaps that he sees out there. All right, let's get to the keys to the game. I think, first key to the game, we kind of talked about it there with the trenches, but we can talk about it here just a little bit more. I think you got to win the line of scrimmage. And the thing that people will say, well, couldn't you put this as a key for every game? I'm going to tell you, there are some games here that, Carolina, especially going up against, Clemson. I think if one of the keys for that game, and I don't know if it's going to be a key, but one of the keys for that game could be just compete at the line of scrimmage because they've got so much talent there. This is a group that, look, they're off to a good start to this season. Carolina should be able to still win at the line of scrimmage. If they are truly a bowl team, I think they have to win at the line of scrimmage because you talked about it. You want to be able to run the ball. You want to be able to stop the run, which we'll get to here as one of our keys here in a minute. But I think, it all starts up front for this group. You need to be winning those one-on-one battles up there. Hopefully the offensive line and defensive lines have grown from that first game against Power 4 competition in the opener against TCU, and they can find a way to win the line of scrimmage in this game.
Yep. Look, it's a key. 95% of the time you walk on the football field, like the rare exceptions when you play a Charlotte or Richmond or whatever, you try to go on the road, you try to win a game against a power conference opponent. You can't do so without taking care of the trench play, the trench warfare. And I think Carolina, the defensive line, to me, it kind of gives me 2015 vibes, where do they get to the quarterback the way that you want to get to the quarterback? No, but they don't kill you either. They make the plays that are there to be made to get you in 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, to where maybe you can get a little bit more blitz happy and be more opportunistic defensively. It's really going to be I think, can this offensive line impose its will, be able to wear down that Central Florida defensive front? They're going to want to run the football 35, 40 times, and then can they hold up in pass pro to give their quarterback a chance to find a rhythm and find some confidence in the passing game? If Carolina does both of those, if they can do that, I think that really tips the scale in their favors to win the game, because I do think Carolina, top to bottom, has more talent right now than what Central Florida's roster has to offer.
Second key to the game is stop the run. We've talked about how explosive this rushing offense has been so far this year for Central Florida. We saw how big of a key it was in that game against TCU, where that was really what put TCU over the top. What made that game ugly was when they were able to start running the football. I think this is a very big key for a team like this, because look, Taven Jackson's off to a solid start to the year. He's not a guy who's going to be able to take over a game like Josh Hoover. He's not going to be as efficient as Josh Hoover is going to be. And this is his first real test. So Carolina, I think, wants to be able to get into those passing situations, those obvious passing downs, where they can dial up some of that exotic pressure, or just win up front with their edge rushers who have gained a little bit of confidence here over the last couple of weeks. Stopping that run will allow Carolina to get this team into an area that they're really not comfortable with their offense. They want to be able to run the football with these guys and find those explosive plays. So to me, that's the second key of the game, is stop the run.
And, we talk so much about gap integrity, and that's been a big reason why Carolina's done a much better job the last 2 weeks. You know what also they've done a good job that maybe we haven't talked about enough? They've tackled better. You go back to the TCU game, it was kind of a lot of the same issues you saw at different times under Bateman, Chizik, or Jeff Collins, where guys were in position to make plays. They just didn't make them. They had 19 missed tackles in the season opener against TCU. 19. And I think they have really cleaned that up in a major way the last 2 weeks. So can you continue to, hold your lane, do what you need to do, and then can you finish plays? Can you, when you're there to make the tackle, can you make the tackle? You're gonna miss tackles. Part of it's because they're good, and they got a back that can make guys miss. but it can't be as frequent as it was against TCU, where it felt like they were just bouncing off of Carolina defenders the entire game and turning what should have been 1-2 yard gains into 3, 4, 5 yard gains, which over the course of time become back-breaking runs like we saw in the second half. So I think if they could hold them to, about 125 or so in the run game, maybe the most they could give up is 150. I think you would feel confident in their ability to win the game, just because of how many times that I think Central Florida is going to run the football. But we'll figure out where this run defense is at, because this is going to be an offense that's really going to test their ability to want to tackle them 35, 40 times.
Yeah, and the tackling is incredibly important, as you mentioned. That was a big part of the reason why TCU was able to rip off some of those big gains on the ground in that first game of the season. We saw it, that extended some of those passing plays as well. But really, especially against this run game where you've seen a lot of explosive plays, tackling is going to limit those explosive plays. So you got to be able to do it. Final key to the game is remain disciplined. And when I say remain disciplined, I mean it. Carolina's done a really good job of being disciplined so far this year. So right now, they are tied for 19th in the country with the fewest penalties taken, with just 4 per game so far this year. They average 43.3 penalty yards per game, which is completely different than where it's been in the past. You look at them as compared to Central Florida. Central Florida is a team that averages a little over 7.5 per game, and they average 67.5 penalty yards per game. So this is going to be huge for Carolina. You've got a team on the other side that does not know how to remain disciplined. They couldn't do it against an FCS opponent and, a group of 5 opponent. Now they're going up against a power conference opponent. That should certainly present some tests for them as well that could lead to some of those penalties. For Carolina, you know that you're a disciplined unit. You were disciplined against TCU, even as bad as that game got. You were disciplined against the other 2 opponents that you had. Make sure that you don't give them extra opportunities or go penalty for penalty with them in this game, because that could be a huge advantage for you at the end of the night that allows you to win this football game.
Yeah, 2 areas that I was most confident in when Belichick got hired that would get cleaned up. I thought Carolina would become better in the special teams department, and quietly they have done that. And I thought they'd be more disciplined. And the penalties that you saw, in an indirect manner cost them games against Mac Brown, you would see get cleaned up. And Carolina's limited their penalties from like 7.4 a year ago to down to 4 this year. So they've practically cut them in half. And that's a sign that there is a new, I think, culture in town, that Belichick has had the impact that you expected him to have, because they're not making the mental errors that they had made so often under Mac Brown's tenure. And penalties become all the more important when you leave your home stadium. Because if you're committing penalties, you're impacting field position one way or another, whether you're backing yourself up on offense or giving them a shorter field when you're on defense. And I do feel like this is going to be a field position game. And those 15 yards, if you commit a personal foul, could be a big 15 yards that impact a drive. A false start that changes a 3rd and 1 to a 3rd and 6 that you don't convert. Now you got to punt the football away. I think those things really get magnified in a game like this, with a team right now that just feels limited on the offensive side of the football. And so if Carolina can continue to be as clean and as crisp and as concise as they've been in the penalty department, I think that's just another little thing that kind of maybe tips the scale in their favor to find a way to go on the road and secure their most significant win so far this season.
All right, let's get to the predictions for this game. We do have one question that's coming in here. We could add this really quickly before we actually predict the game. This from Greg Ward. Will we ride Gio all game Saturday? I believe yes. I find it hard to believe they're going to turn the reins over to Max Johnson during this game, unless it just gets that ugly where we're talking, Gio comes out first few drives, 3 drives, 3 turnovers, just not moving the football at all. I just don't see that happening. I think Carolina will be able to move it a little bit, but I still don't know how efficient they're going to be. I say yes, they do end up riding him the entire game and sticking with him for every snap.
You didn't see him against Charlotte when everyone was saying you had to play him. You didn't see him last week against Richmond, even in garbage time. They sent out Newkirk out there instead of him. So yes, I think the earliest we could see a potential Max Johnson signing, barring an injury, or I mean, if the game's 41-7 in the fourth quarter, I would imagine you see Max Johnson. But outside of that, I think the only way we could really have this conversation again is going into the Clemson game. This staff is committed to Gio Lopez as of right now, and I expect that to continue on Saturday afternoon.
All right, let's get to the predictions for the game. As I always do, I'll let you go first. What do you see happening in this one?
If I remember correctly, I think I had Carolina winning this game back when we preseason the schedule when I had Carolina at 10-2. I no longer think that Carolina is going to reach the 10-win plateau, but I do think 7-5 and 8-4 is very much attainable for this group, and that happens with a win on the road. I think on Saturday afternoon. I think Carolina just knows a little bit more about themselves because they've played one more game than Central Florida. I think they've got just a little bit more talent and depth right now than the Knights have. And I think they can make maybe one or two more explosive plays. That's funny to say because of how bad this offense has been, but I think Damon June can break off a big run. Jordan Shipp can make a big play or two in the passing game. And I really believe that Carolina has really taken a step forward defensively. And I think you're going to see closer what you've seen the last 2 weeks defensively as opposed to what you saw back in the opener on Labor Day night. I don't think it's pretty. I don't think it's sexy. I don't think it's exciting, but I don't care about that. I care about winning. I think Carolina walks away with a 24-20 win on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think this is a game that Carolina needs if you want to get to a bowl game, because it just there are not a lot of games that are lining up that are going to be this. I'm not going to say this game is easy, but there's not going to be as many flawed teams on your schedule as you thought there were going to be. So you need this one. It's crucial. I think they want to be able to build off of what they did and continue that momentum. You never really know what ends up happening in your next game because we don't know what Clemson is going to roll in there having done. I know they got a bye week coming up, but they got a game against Syracuse that's not going to be the easiest game that they've ever played. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that game. In order to give yourself hope for that game, though, you got to win this game. And I think you're right. I think the biggest difference for me is that there seems to be a talent gap for Carolina. I think it's very slight right now over Central Florida, but I do think that there is a little bit of a gap, and it should be in favor of the Tar Heels in this game. The one thing that really concerns me is the quarterback position, but I think if Gio Lopez comes out and plays even solid enough football, Carolina is going to find a way to win this game because I like the way they run the football. I think we found some answers in the passing game whenever Gio can hit those guys. I think in the trenches, Carolina is going to be able to win this matchup. Again, I don't think it's going to be by a large margin, but I think it will be just enough. And I think this run defense will come out ready to prove themselves after what happened against TCU. I think Carolina comes away with the victory. I think, like you said, it's going to be a very ugly one. I think this one, even uglier than you had it, I think Carolina wins this one 21-17 over Central Florida down there at the Bright House. So, no matter what ends up happening, we'll have you covered here on the Heel Tough blog side of things. Podcast, of course, we have you covered on Monday night. We'll be back recapping that. I'll give you my late night reaction to the game late on Saturday night once we get through the day of college football. I like to do that just to sort of set everything up, get some of my early opinions out and everything. And you guys really seem to enjoy that. I know some people may ask, why is it late at night? Oh, we're watching other games. We got to keep up with the rest of the country, and we've got to get prepared for our next opponent and stuff like that. So we like to take all of that in. And then once we get to, the late games, I'm always keeping an eye on Cal and whatever they got going on and stuff like that because we play them later in the year. But I do like to then roll out those videos for you guys. So keep an eye out for that on Saturday. We'll be back on Monday to recap the game for you guys. Meanwhile, on the website side of things, we, of course, will have the preview up there for you guys for this game. Make sure that you guys are checking that out. All the latest injury reports that we get, whenever we get any injury reports, we put those in there for you guys. And then we'll update that right up until game time. So make sure that you guys check that out. In there, you got more team breakdown. So if you don't think we went in depth enough here tonight for Central Florida for your liking, I go a little more in depth in that article for you guys so that you can get a better understanding of the team that Carolina is facing. You've got the team stat breakdowns as well. That's certainly something that gives you a look inside what these teams do well, what Carolina does well, what they don't. Same thing for Central Florida. And then, we've got the keys to the game where I'll go in depth on those kind of on that stuff again. And same thing with any of the other game information that we give you in the projected starting lineups as well. Know who Carolina is going to be facing when they're out there on Saturday. So make sure you check out that article. We'll be back with the recap article after the game. Been doing those mostly on Sundays. I think that's probably going to continue where we put that out on Sunday mornings. I'll try to get it up a little bit earlier than I've been getting it up for you guys, but definitely want to get those up there for you guys so that you can read it after the game is over. And any other news that comes out around the program, of course, this week we had the news that Isaiah Johnson stepped away from the program, stepped away from the program, has left the team after playing just 5 snaps for Carolina in the first 3 games of the season. So we had you covered with that news. And again, you guys, you've done a great job so far, but we encourage you to make sure that you keep checking on that stuff, checking the website at HeelToughBlog.com or checking the social medias at HeelToughBlog on Twitter, the Facebook page, or our personal social media pages, because right now we are not getting to share into the Facebook groups the way we want to. We want to get this news out to you guys, but they're restricting us from doing that. So the best way to do it is to make sure that you are either, you are either a member of the website, you are a follower on Twitter and have those post notifications turned on, or you are you have liked the Facebook page and follow the Facebook page so that you get it straight into your feed whenever you hop on Facebook. So make sure that you guys do that. We keep imploring that. And the other thing that we keep imploring, of course, is to subscribe to that YouTube channel. That is important for us, guys. That's going to help us, especially as we continue to look for sponsors and stuff like that. They want to see those YouTube numbers. That's very important to them. So make sure that you guys help us out by giving us a subscription over there on YouTube. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's edition of the podcast. Want to thank everyone who watched and listened to this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. And as always, go Tar Heels.